Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be digging into, well, the book is called Ancient Cures, Charms, and Usages of Ireland.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
Yeah, I mean, just the title alone. And, this book really takes us back in time to a world where, well, folklore and tradition weren't just stories. They were part of everyday life.
Right, yeah. People saw magic and the supernatural everywhere. In a simple cough or a spilled bucket of milk.
Exactly. Like every little thing had a meaning, sign of something bigger.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this book so intriguing. It's not just a collection of old wives' tales. It's a window into a completely different way of seeing the world.
So are you ready to sort of step back in time and uncover some of these, well, ancient beliefs?
I am. Lead the way.
Okay, so the book starts off talking about, well, the title of this chapter is The Irish Doctors. And, when I think of doctors back then, I kind of picture, like, the village healer, mixing herbs and maybe setting a broken bone or two.
Yeah, that's a common image, isn't it? But this book paints a very different picture of these Irish doctors, particularly those associated with the Druid order.
Yeah, that's what really surprised me. They weren't just, like, simple healers. They had this, like, elevated social standing. They were given places of honor at royal tables, ranked even higher than skilled metalworkers.
It really speaks to how much their knowledge and skills were valued. And they weren't just valued for their medical expertise. The book mentions that they even wore distinctive robes to, signify their status.
It's like they were the wise men, almost like a priesthood in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. They were seen as having this special connection to the natural world and to the forces beyond.
And it wasn't just about, like, treating illnesses. There's this amazing story about a physician named Dianect who lived during the time of the Battle of Moytura. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yes, of course. That's one of the most famous battles in Irish mythology.
Well, during this battle, Dianect supposedly used a magical herb bath to heal wounded soldiers right there on the battlefield.
That's a powerful image, isn't it? It speaks to the almost mythical aura surrounding these healers. They weren't just doctors, they were miracle workers.
Exactly. They were almost like magicians in a way.
Yeah. And there's another detail about Dianec that I find really fascinating. The book mentions that he crafted a silver hand for King Nuada, who had lost his hand in the battle.
Wow. So not only was he a healer, but also, like, a skilled artisan.
Right. It makes you wonder what other skills and knowledge might have been present in those times. Are we talking about early prosthetics? Did they have advanced metalworking techniques that we've lost track of?
It's like a whole world of possibilities opens up when you start thinking about it. But we got to get to the real heart of this book, the cures and charms themselves. Because, what really struck me is how these weren't just practical recipes or treatments. They seem to be infused with a deep sense of ritual and spirituality.
Oh, absolutely. The ingredients were important, of course, but the power of belief played a crucial role. It was like they were trying to tap into a deeper, more spiritual understanding of healing and protection.
Like you had to really believe in it for it to work.
Exactly. And the book even specifies certain days of the week, Wednesdays and Fridays, as the best days for performing these charms. And it talks about fasting as a way to enhance their effectiveness.
So it wasn't just about, swallowing a potion or wearing a charm. It was about aligning yourself, your mind and body, with those deeper forces.
Right. It was almost like a form of prayer or meditation, a way of connecting with something bigger than yourself.
Okay, so ready for some examples? Because some of these cures are really, well, let's just say they're pretty out there.
Hit me with them. I'm ready for anything.
All right, so for epilepsy, they recommend a 9-part elder twig necklace. But here's the catch. It loses its power if it touches the ground.
Oh, wow. So it's like the power is in the connection, the unbroken link between the person and the natural world.
Yeah, that's how I see it. And then there's the charm for staunching blood. This one involves invoking a man baptized in the muddy Jordan River.
Ah, so the location of the baptism imbues the charm with a particular potency. It's like they're drawing on the sacredness of that place.
It's fascinating, right? Like how they blend these everyday elements with these, like, spiritual references. But this next one is a bit more, let's just say it's got a bit of a dark side to it.
Oh, let's hear it.
So they used a plant called lusmore to treat people suspected of being, well, bewitched. But lusmore is also described as a dangerous poison.
Ah, so it's a remedy and a potential hazard all in one. It's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. It's like the natural world, in their eyes, held both healing and danger. It could cure you or kill you, depending on how it was used.
And how much you believed in its power. I think that's a key takeaway here. The belief was as important as the ingredients themselves.
Absolutely. And this power of belief is really highlighted in a story about a family, the McGowans of County Cavan.
Have I heard of them?
Maybe, maybe not. But they're known for possessing a secret cure for hydrophobia, rabies. And this cure has been passed down through generations for over 150 years.
Wow, that's a powerful legacy. So where did they get this cure?
Well, the story goes that their ancestor was approached by this wise woman. She was in dire straits, and he offered her shelter and food. In return, she gave him the secret to this cure.
Ah, so it was a gift given in gratitude for an act of kindness. That's a lovely element to the story. But I'm guessing there are some rules attached to this cure. Like, it can't be as simple, right?
You are absolutely right. The patient can't cross water during the treatment, and they have to be brought to the McGowans within 9 days. And of course, the identity of the herb is a closely guarded secret.
It's like they've been entrusted with this sacred knowledge, something to be protected and used responsibly, and it works then, this cure.
Well, the book mentions a case where the McGowans successfully treated a whole group of people, including a farmer and his family, after they were bitten by a rabid cat. So, make of that what you will.
It certainly adds to the mystery, doesn't it? This blend of folklore and perhaps a genuine medical discovery.
Makes you wonder what secrets are still out there, hidden in the mists of time. But this world of healing and protection wasn't all sunshine and roses. The book also explores what it calls malefic charms. Basically, the flip side of these powers.
Ah, so the same forces that could heal could also be used to harm. It reminds us that this belief system wasn't just about benevolent forces. There was a darker side to it as well.
Right. It's like the Force in Star Wars. It can be used for good or for evil.
Perfect analogy. And the book gives some rather unsettling examples of these malefic charms. It mentions the belief that pointing a finger bone at someone could bring about their death.
Yeah, it's a bit chilling to think about. Like, imagine living in a world where something as simple as a pointed bone could hold that much power.
It speaks to the power of belief, doesn't it? If you truly believed that a pointed bone could kill you, well, maybe it could.
Yeah, it's like the power of suggestion, almost. But it gets even darker. The book describes this ritual called imbus forosna, which basically involved invoking evil spirits to gain knowledge of the future.
So not just harming others, but also like meddling with the fabric of fate.
Right. It's like a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge, even in the spiritual realm, could have a dark side.
And that some knowledge might be better left undiscovered.
Yeah, some doors are maybe best left unopened. But speaking of things that might keep you up at night, let's move on to a topic that's always captured the imagination. Witchcraft.
Ah, yes, the stuff of legends and nightmares. But for the ancient Irish, witchcraft wasn't just a scary story. It was a real and present danger, something they had to actively defend against.
Right, and the book is full of these practices for warding off witches. It's amazing how these beliefs permeated every aspect of life, from the home to the farmyard.
So it wasn't just about protecting yourself, but also your livestock, your home, your livelihood. It really was a constant concern.
Yeah, like they saw witchcraft everywhere. For instance, they would tie a rowan branch to a baby's cradle or even to a cow's tail to protect them from witches.
Rowan trees held a lot of significance in their belief system. They were seen as having protective qualities.
And then there's this whole thing about the evil eye, which was believed to be particularly potent on May Eve. The book recommends sprinkling oatmeal on a cow's back for protection.
Oatmeal, really?
Yeah, oatmeal. I mean, some of these remedies sound a bit out there, but it shows you how seriously they took these threats. They were willing to try anything to keep themselves and their animals safe.
And I think it also speaks to the power of ritual, It's not just about the oatmeal itself. It's about the act of sprinkling it, the intention behind it. It's a way of actively engaging with the unseen forces and trying to exert some control over them.
Okay, but we can't talk about Irish folklore without mentioning one of its most iconic figures.
Yeah.
The leprechaun.
Oh, the leprechaun. The mischievous shoemaker with a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. He's a fascinating character, isn't he? A blend of luck, cunning, and a little bit of trickery.
Exactly. But the book suggests he's more than just a jolly fellow with a fondness for gold. It mentions that he possesses a secret herb that enables him to locate hidden treasure.
So it's not just luck. He's got knowledge and skills. He's a master of his craft. both as a shoemaker and as a treasure seeker.
Right. But even with all his magical abilities and knowledge, he's still portrayed as a bit of a trickster. It's like a reminder that in the world of folklore, things are rarely straightforward. There's always an element of mystery and unpredictability.
And that even those with great power can be prone to mischief.
Okay, so we've got magical cures, malevolent charms, mischievous leprechauns. Where do we go from here?
Well, we've talked about plants and creatures, but there's another element of the natural world that held deep significance for the ancient Irish. Trees.
Trees. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Certain trees, especially the hazel and the rowan, were believed to have unique protective powers.
Like they were guardians against evil spirits.
Exactly. The hazel tree was considered particularly potent, the ultimate defender against demons and witchcraft.
And the rowan. I've heard of rowan trees being associated with protection.
Yes, the rowan was also highly revered. The book mentions hanging rowan branches on May Day for protection, a tradition that still survives in some parts of Ireland.
It's amazing how these beliefs have endured through the centuries.
It speaks to the enduring power of nature in shaping human understanding. Trees weren't just sources of wood or shade. They were seen as living entities with their own energies, capable of influencing human affairs.
And it wasn't just trees. Animals, too, played a role in this world of belief and superstition. In particular, the book draws a stark contrast between the robin redbreast and the water wagtail.
Oh, interesting. Two very different birds. So which one was seen as the good guy?
Well, the robin was considered a sacred protector, while the water wagtail was viewed as unholy and unlucky.
Why such a difference?
There's this story that the robin shielded Jesus with moss, while the water wagtail exposed him. It's like they were imbued with these symbolic meanings, representing opposing forces of good and evil.
So even the animal world was woven into this framework of belief and morality. It wasn't just about humans and spirits.
Exactly. Every creature, every plant, every element of the natural world had a role to play, a meaning to be deciphered. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of Irish folklore, omens and superstitions.
Ah, yes, the art of reading the signs, of finding meaning in the everyday occurrences.
Right. It's like they believed the world was constantly sending them messages, warnings, glimpses into the future. You just had to know how to interpret them.
So give me some examples. What kind of omens were they looking out for?
Well, for instance, a raven hovering near a cottage was a sign of impending doom. Bad news was coming.
Ravens have often been associated with death and ill fortune.
And even the direction a rooster's head pointed while crowing could indicate the recovery or death of someone who was ill.
So every little detail, every seemingly random occurrence could hold a deeper meaning.
Exactly. And if a hen had the audacity to crow on the roost, well, that was a sure sign of fairy mischief.
And what did you do if your hen decided to crow on the roost?
According to the book, you had to decapitate it to avert misfortune.
Wow. Sounds a bit drastic, doesn't it?
It does make you wonder how much of this was based on actual observation versus a desire to find patterns and impose meaning on a world that could often feel chaotic and unpredictable.
That's a good point. I think it was likely a combination of both. They were keen observers of nature, but they also had this deep-seated belief in the interconnectedness of all things. So it makes sense that they would look for signs and symbols in their surroundings.
And this need to find meaning and order extended to one of the most mysterious and feared places of all,
Yeah.
burial grounds.
Ah, yes. Places where the veil between the worlds was at its thinnest.
The book emphasizes the belief that the dead, especially on Halloween Eve, could influence the lives of the living. And there was this particular superstition that really stuck with me. If a living person is buried among the dead will rise from their graves.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? Like, you don't want to disturb the dead. You want to respect their space and ensure their peaceful rest.
Exactly. And there's this really interesting story about a man who's haunted by his deceased brother's ghost.
A vengeful spirit.
Not exactly. It turns out the brother's spirit is restless because stolen thread was used to sew his burial clothes.
So it's not about revenge. It's about a sense of injustice, a need for things to be right.
Right. And it highlights the importance of proper burial rites. It wasn't just about ceremony or tradition. It was about ensuring the deceased's smooth transition to the next realm and preventing their restless spirits from troubling the living.
It's a reminder that in this belief system, actions had consequences, even beyond the grave, and that the dead were not to be trifled with.
Yeah, they were a force to be reckoned with, both respected and feared.
Ah.
But we're going to have to pause our exploration of restless spirits and haunted graveyards for now. Join us for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll delve even further into the captivating world of Irish folklore. Welcome back to our deep dive. We're still exploring this book, Ancient Cures, Charms, and Usages of Ireland. And I gotta say, the more we dig into it, the more I realize how much respect the ancient Irish had for the dead.
Absolutely. They weren't just gone. They were still present, influencing the world around them.
Like in that story about the man haunted by his brother's ghost.
Yeah, the stolen thread. Imagine believing so strongly in the importance of proper burial rites that even something like that could, well, disrupt the peace.
It makes you think twice about cutting corners, doesn't it? Whether
Actually.
it's burying a body or just living your life.
Right. Like every action has consequences, even beyond the grave.
Speaking of, well, beings that exist beyond the grave, this book has some fascinating stuff about two figures in particular, the Banshee and the Demon Bride.
Oh, yeah. They're classics, each representing, I guess, different aspects of the supernatural. The Banshee, with her warnings of death, and the Demon Bride, well, she's all about temptation and danger.
The Banshee is such a haunting figure, that mournful wail foretelling a death in the family. It's so deeply rooted in Irish folklore.
What's interesting is how she's portrayed, right? Like she's not this hideous monster or anything. She's often described as a beautiful young woman.
Yeah, it's that contrast that makes her so, I don't know, unsettling.
Beauty and death intertwined. It's a powerful image.
It makes you think about how death can come in any form, at any time. But the Demon Bride, now she sounds a bit more straight up evil.
Oh, yeah, she's a classic temptress, lurking in the churchyard of Trua, no less, luring young men with promises of wealth and beauty, but ultimately leading them to their doom.
It's a story as old as time, isn't it? The dangers of falling for, well, for things that seem too good to be true.
It's a reminder to be wary of, those things that glitter on the surface. There's often a darker truth lurking beneath.
So we've got warnings of death, temptations of the devil. Let's shift gears a bit to something a little more festive.
Festive, you mean like awake?
Not quite. I'm talking about St. Patrick's Day. You know, parades, shamrocks, the whole bit. But even this holiday, as Christian as it is, has some deep roots in Irish folklore.
Oh, absolutely. The book tells a story about St. Patrick's own sister, Lupate, and her lover, who happened to be pagan. Their son was, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly welcomed into the Christian fold.
Condemned, actually. Patrick condemned his own nephew.
It's a fascinating story. I mean, it really captures that clash between the old ways and the new religion that was sweeping across Ireland.
And Lupate, being a loyal sister and all, she pleaded with Patrick to show mercy.
And in the end, he kind of did, right? Not in the way she might have hoped, but he promised her a special day each year.
A day of celebration, a blending of the old and the new. It shows how, even in the face of religious conversion, some traditions manage to survive, maybe in a slightly different form.
Like the roots of a tree, they run deep even when the branches are swaying in a new direction.
But speaking of traditions and celebrations, let's talk about May Day. It was the time for welcoming spring, but also, well, a time of heightened anxiety about the supernatural, particularly those pesky fairies.
Oh yes, May Day was a time when the veil between the human world and the fairy realm was especially thin.
So, fairies were just popping in and out, wreaking havoc.
Potentially. The book outlines all sorts of taboos associated with May Day, things you weren't supposed to do, like give away fire or let a stranger milk your cows.
Sounds exhausting, keeping track of all those rules.
Right, just imagine living in a world where you had to constantly be on guard against fairy mischief.
But it wasn't just about avoiding certain actions. There were also protective measures, like hanging rowan branches and making the sign of the cross.
A mix of pagan tradition and Christian symbolism all rolled into one.
And get this, the book claims that on May Day, the ancient Irish kings would rise from their graves.
That's a pretty wild image.
Right. Imagine seeing your long-dead ancestors just strolling through town on May Day.
It's a reminder that for the ancient Irish, the past was never truly gone. It was always present, influencing the present, shaping their understanding of the world.
But it wasn't all about, fearing fairies and dead kings. They also tried to peer into the future, to get a glimpse of what was to come.
Oh, right. The book mentions rituals on May Eve, where they'd sweep the threshold, sprinkle ashes, and then try to interpret the footprints left behind.
It sounds a bit like reading tea leaves or something.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. It's all about finding meaning in the seemingly random patterns of the world.
It's like they were trying to to make sense of the chaos, to find some order in the universe.
And maybe even exert some control over their destiny. But May Day wasn't the only time when the fairy realm was especially active. The book also talks about Whitsuntide.
Ah, yes, Whitsuntide. More fairies. Do we ever get a break from these mischievous creatures?
Not really. And the book has a rather captivating story about a young man named Brian. He's lured into a fairy dance by by this beautiful enchantress and ends up disappearing for 7 days.
It sounds like a cautionary tale. Don't go dancing with fairies.
Right. It's like a reminder of how easily we can be seduced by beauty, by the allure of the unknown.
And what happens to Brian? Does he ever make it back home?
He does, but not without the help of a wise fairy doctor who uses the power of Brian's mother's tears to break the spell.
The power of a mother's love. That's a classic trope in folklore, isn't it?
It speaks to the strength of those bonds, the power of human emotions to overcome even magical enchantments.
But this idea of a fairy doctor is interesting. It's like they had their own healers and remedies, even in the supernatural realm.
Right, like a whole other system of medicine with its own set of rules and practices. And the book even claims that the best protection against fairy influence was to marry a pure, true wife.
So love conquers all, even fairies.
It seems so. It's like a strong, loving relationship acted as a kind of anchor, grounding a person in the human world and shielding them from the allure of the fairy realm.
It's a nice sentiment, isn't it? But let's move on to a time of year that's still widely celebrated, though maybe not in the same way it was back then.
You mean like Halloween?
Yeah, Halloween, or as the ancient Irish called it, Hallowtide, or Samhain.
Mm.
It was a time when the veil between the worlds was at its thinnest, and the presence of the dead was especially strong.
A time of both remembrance and, I imagine, a bit of anxiety.
Oh, definitely. The book describes all sorts of rituals they performed to honor the dead, like gathering barley cakes and butter and money for a feast.
It was about acknowledging the cyclical nature of life and death, honoring those who came before, and recognizing their continuing presence in the world.
But they also used this time to try and peer into the future, using mirrors and candles and ashes for divination.
Again, that human need to make sense of the unknown, to control what we can't control.
And there was this strong belief in the importance of proper burial clothes for the dead. Apparently, even altering those clothes could anger the spirits.
It shows how seriously they took the needs and desires of the dead.
It's almost like they believed the dead were still, participating in life in some way.
They were still part of the community, even in death, and their well-being, their peace was important.
It's a different way of thinking about death, isn't it? Not as an ending, but as a transition to another state of being.
A state that was still intertwined with the world of the living.
Welcome back to our final exploration of ancient cures, charms, and usages of Ireland. We've been delving into this world of ancient Irish beliefs. Fairies, spirits, cures, charms. I mean, it's all a bit out there, right?
It is fascinating, isn't it, how they saw magic and the supernatural woven into every aspect of life. But as we reach the end of our journey, I think it's important to remember that their world wasn't all doom and gloom, fear and superstition. There was also this vibrant sense of playfulness and community, especially in their celebrations and gatherings.
You're talking about those games they played, right? The ones at wakes and festivals.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. Games at a wake, it might seem a bit odd to us, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
But it just shows how differently they viewed these occasions. It wasn't about dwelling on sadness or, being overly somber. It was about the community coming together, sharing stories, finding moments of joy, even in the face of loss.
So what kind of games are we talking about here?
Well, one that caught my eye is called the game of the rope. They'd tie a rope to a chair and then basically use it to playfully coerce a young man into revealing the name of his sweetheart. Then the lucky fellow gets to kiss his beloved, all while being gently beaten with the rope.
Okay, that's definitely not something you'd see at a modern party, but it's kind of sweet in a way, right? Like this playful teasing, this ritualistic way of, bringing couples together.
It definitely gives us a glimpse into their social customs, the way they blended humor and romance and, maybe a bit of lighthearted mischief into their gatherings.
It's a reminder that even in times of sorrow or solemnity, they found ways to celebrate life, to connect with each other.
Exactly. And then there's the horse fair, where they tie a bunch of young men together and pretend to auction them off as horses.
I can just imagine the laughter and the good-natured ribbing that must have gone on.
It sounds like they knew how to have a good time.
They did. And it makes you realize that this book, it's not just about ancient beliefs and superstitions. It's about people, you know, their lives, their loves, their losses, their laughter. It's a window into a whole way of life that's vanished now.
And there's a certain sadness to that, isn't there? The book itself even talks about the decline of these traditions, how the mirth and laughter were fading from the Irish countryside.
It makes you wonder, what those who lived in those times would make of our world today. Would they be horrified by our technology, our fast-paced lives, our disconnect from nature? Or would they see some of their own values reflected in our modern society?
That's a question worth pondering, isn't it? As we close this chapter on ancient Irish beliefs, maybe we should each take a moment to reflect on our own lives. What traditions, what beliefs, what little bits of magic do we still carry with us?
Maybe it's a family recipe passed down through generations, or a lucky charm we keep tucked away in a drawer.
Or even just a belief in the power of a wish made on a shooting star. Those little remnants of the past, they connect us to something bigger than ourselves, to a time when the world was full of mystery and wonder.
And even though our understanding of the world has changed, I think those fundamental human desires, the need for healing, for protection, for connection to something beyond the everyday, those haven't gone away.
Absolutely. They're still there, shaping our lives, driving our choices, even if we don't always realize it.
So as we say goodbye to this deep dive into ancient cures, charms, and usages of Ireland, let's not dismiss these beliefs as mere superstition or outdated folklore.
Let's see them instead as a reflection of the human spirit, our capacity for wonder, our search for meaning, our desire to find our place in a world that can be both beautiful and terrifying.
And maybe, just maybe, if we listen closely enough, we can still hear echoes of that ancient magic in the rustling leaves, the crashing waves, the quiet moments of contemplation beneath a starlit sky.
Those moments that remind us that there's more to life than what we can see and touch, that there's a mystery to existence that we may never fully understand, but that we can always appreciate.
And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that sense of wonder alive.